does things against the law, it can not run away from it unless it owns up and provide a relief for what has been done against the law. Governor has mentioned about the protectorate era and the colonial era. In law, a country that is exercising protectorate under international law cannot exercise what is called domestic jurisdiction. It's their business to be concerned about the foreign issues, foreign affairs, foreign trade, diplomacy, and probably things to do with war. But then when it comes to matters of land, they are not supposed to do anything in alienating land. But for the British, they did the very opposite. Took away land in huge acreages. By 1907, the entire Kitchens land had been declared to be Crown land. Crown land. And then the criteria of describing this is very offensive to the English language. Crown land was supposed to be wasteland and unoccupied land. Mark those words. They are in English, isn't it? Wastelands and unoccupied land. But what we see on the ground, what is your understanding of a wasteland? Is it land that probably is acquired, you can use it for agriculture? Is it land that is wasteland, wetland, where you can't do any agriculture? How do you acquire what you are calling wasteland and you turn into very big-time business, world-class business, and you are calling it wastelands? That is English language. Let them explain to us. They are the English speakers. They are the custodians of English language. But how do you call land unoccupied? Yet the 39 or 38, parcels of land that forms the estates in Kericho are all having local names. I can name all those names. Chagaye, Chimen, Tagabi, all that. You may not understand them. If they were not occupied, probably they would have called it by names from England. We'll be having New Hampshire, we'll be having Colchester, we'll be having New Hampshire, we'll be having all these interesting names. Maybe the Itare River or River Chemosit will actually be the little Thames to the river. But people were occupying those places. We've done in-depth research. We've discovered ports and artifacts that were used by our people. We've discovered that other than the stories that we are hearing from our forefathers, our fathers and our mothers, our grandmothers, we have also discovered scientifically that there are so many areas where tea cannot grow, and it's because where you have kept a lot of livestock, tea will not grow because of too much alkalinity, I believe. So tea cannot grow there. So all these places were homestead. So this idea of calling it unoccupied is false. How can you give the crown what is wasteland, a crown of England, giving it what is wasteland? Now, that our people suffered is best captured by the writings of the Kericho District Commissioner then, by the name of A.S. Swan, Anthony Swan, who in 1946 in the Kericho report stated that certainly there is no other African community that has lost more land than the unfortunate Kitchens land. In 1946, that is what he wrote. We lost more than 1 million acres. In the entire of Kenya, the communities in Kenya lost a total of 6,750,000 acres. And I challenge historians, I challenge all of us who are very passionate in these subjects to probably go out and investigate further. Let's not confine ourselves sometimes to what individual communities suffered. For instance, in my coming to the National Archives at the Kew Gardens in UK, I found a lot of interesting literature. First of all, my sister from Zimbabwe ably stated so many things yesterday about the return of the artifacts and so forth, and also how we manage those special places where they were regarded to be holy sites. In Kenya, the communities that lost land, out of 44 ethnic groups, probably 6 or 7 lost land, and this includes the Kikuyus, of course, of Northern Nyeri, Kiambu, Nairobi area, and then the Kalenjins, ourselves from Kericho, a bit of Nakuru as well. Then the Tugets of Eldama Ravine, the Nandis in Uasin and Nandi district, the Maasais, of course. The British entered into 2 treaties with the Maasais, 1904 and 1911. The Anglo-Maasai Treaty of 1904 and 1911. Those are 2 treaties, meaning that they should not have owned land or own land, because when you are entering a treaty, what does that mean? That you are negotiating with another power whom you have you have some equal basis for doing that. But for the British, they call it a treaty, yet they had very interesting ideas about it. And then when you look at that treaty, because I've checked and taken time to read it at the National Archives, it was a treaty that was written by probably one of the best barristers of that time. In understanding the English is a problem, and I don't think the Maasais even understood what they were talking about. But the Kipsigis, at least with the Maasais, they pretended that we are entering into some treaties. They could go back and say this is what the treaty says. For the Kipsigis, there was no treaty. We are just being untwisted. We are being chased away. Governor has talked about the removal of the Tamai from Kericho area to Kwasi. There was actually an ordinance, the removal of the Talai Ordinance of 1934. And there was active involvement of the Secretary of Colonies in England, not in Kenya, but in England, who came up, when you look at the draft ordinance, he amended it and said include section 9B. In section 9B, anybody who was being treated as a Talai had to prove that he was not a Talai. Talai, by the way, are a special or aristocratic part of the Kipsigis people. They are a special clan. We traditionally, there were people who had the ability to tell us about the future. Whenever we are going into war, they'll plan for that war. They'll also bless the warriors before going to war. And when they are coming back from war, they'll at the same time do some traditional rituals that allows people to come back after shedding blood. A man will not be allowed to come back to his family before some traditional rituals is done. And for us, the Talai occupied a very central position in as far as governance is concerned. They were our leaders. We're talking about people like Koitonel Samuel. We're talking about the first ever Kenyans to be sent into exile. Our king that time was a Talai by the name of Kipchombe Arap Koitonel, who was actually the elder brother of Koitonel Samuel. In 1914, after the British did everything to try to appease him and to make him subservient to them, so that probably they were to sign an Anglo-Kipsigis treaty. Because that did not work, in 1905, there was a kind of treatment whereby he was taken to Mombasa through the railway line, and in Mombasa he was given so many gifts, including umbrellas and mirrors, things that people were not used to, and given very nice wine, but he refused to sign the treaty allowing the British to own land in Kericho. So that I don't take a lot of time, there are two things that need to come out very clearly. Number one, in 1963, when we gained independence, Zimbabwe had lost 18 million acres of land. But when Kenya got independence, up to 1980, when Zimbabwe got independence, land in Zimbabwe was 17 million acres of land from native Zimbabweans were taken away by the white people who are living in Kenya to own land in Zimbabwe. Because in Zimbabwe, land was very cheap. You'll sell 1,000 acres of land to give you enough money to buy 5,000 acres in Zimbabwe, and you do developments and other stuff like that. So a linkage, obviously, is provided between land injustices in Kenya and also in Zimbabwe. This thing cannot be treated in isolation, and I challenge historians like Professor Chege here to be able to provide the site nexus. Number two, apartheid started in Kenya. The British could have called it a different name, but choosing people and putting them in the so-called native reserves. What is the difference between when you put a particular group of people in a reserve with the apartheid in South Africa, which at least the Afrikaners were very open about it, but the British were doing it in a very certain manner. The other thing that I need to say is, apartheid started in Kenya but was perfected in South Africa, and I think there should be a research on that kind of nexus. British cannot run away from the fact that they are the ones who started apartheid, which is racial segregation. Secondly, and very importantly, when they declare Kenya a colony, it means we became part of the British crown. We were subject of the Queen of England or the King of England, whoever was the crown that time. Meaning that as a subject we should have enjoyed equal status in law. But why separate people on the basis of their color? When I hear this song of Lucky Dube, I think it was very applicable in Kenya. Born to Serve and other stuff like that. I could say more and more about the Talais. Talais, by the way, when they are in Kwasi, census was being done every year. And we know that other international practice, census are done every 10 years. And this census was not so that they could provide basic human services like education, health centers, and other stuff like that. As a matter of fact, they never built any health center. The British, by the way, never built anything in Gypsy's land. All we had are prisons and detention camps. The reason why some of us went to school is because of the American missionaries. The British missionaries were also on a mission, but to steal land. That's why we don't find Anglican Church being active in Kericho, because you cannot preach the gospel to somebody you are stealing land from. I think I've said enough. And,
thank you. Thank you. Keeping with the subject of land, I'm going to hand over to Tom Wills, who's dealing with contemporary issues in Liberia at the moment, but also throughout the continent. So thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Nikita. And it's a huge pleasure to be here today, to be invited to speak alongside these panelists, and delighted to see so many people in the room. As Nikita said, my expertise is not in reparations, and it's also not in the crimes of British colonialism, and I think that subject is aptly covered by my fellow panelists. Instead, I'm looking at crimes that are being committed today, in recent years, and will be committed in years to come by British companies in the global south. And then I will also talk a little bit about how the law needs to change to ensure that communities can access justice when they're subject to crimes such as those that are currently going on today. Formal territorial state-led empire is by and large over, but in the gap we have structures of power that remain, and those have a corporate face. The economy is globalized, and we have huge multinational corporations, many of which are based here in the City of London or have financing from the City of London or are registered on the London Stock Exchange, that have huge power in how they operate around the world, in how they employ people, in how they source from people, and in how they respect human rights. The dynamics of empire, as many of you will know, remain, but with a corporate face. In recent years, British companies have been accused of dumping toxic waste, of being complicit in the killings of local people via private security firms, of the supply of surveillance software that's been used to infringe human rights of people in other countries. These are just allegations that have come up in the last 5 years, and I'll be talking specifically about land grabs that have gone on in the past and are going on today, and this, I think, is best characterised as modern-day corporate colonialism. Before I go any further, to explain where I come from, Tradecraft Exchange is an NGO that's based in the UK. We come from the Fair Trade movement, and I have colleagues in East Africa, in India and Bangladesh, and they work directly with artisans and farmers who are part of global supply chains. The role of myself and other colleagues in London is to advocate for company policies and for the British government to take policies that support the dignity and fairness in global supply chains, with our interests always being those at the furthest end, producing for our shelves and for our supermarkets. We look at garments, we look at green beans, tea, coffee, those kind of classic fair trade supply chains, and also recently we've looked at palm oil, which has led me to Liberia. So land grabbing, we've spoken about a little bit already. It can be best characterised as unlawful seizure of land, underhand, opportunistic, and it's going on right now. The most recent estimates from 2016 are that British companies have been involved in 124 land transactions outside the European Union, and overall that accounts for parcels of land the size of Wales. And in looking to find out more about what this global land grab really means, I went in November to interview members of a community in Grand Bassa County in Liberia. In the post-Civil War years, Liberia's economic prospects have been pretty bleak, and the policy taken by the Liberian government has been to sell off large parts of their own land to international agricultural investors and mining companies, and they've been given as concessions. Communities that are resident on those lands have not been adequately consulted and often have been tricked, and I'm sure people can see the parallels with what previous panelists have spoken about. Equatorial Palm Oil are the company under question. There are British companies registered on the AIM market, which is a sub-market of the London Stock Exchange, and for the last 10 years they've been establishing 2 large palm oil plantations in rural Liberia. The community that stuck with me most from my interviews had been visited by officials from the government of Liberia and from Equatorial Palm Oil staff. It was the first time since the war had finished that people with weapons had come into their community, and these people were just there to assert that a deal had been done in Monrovia, in the capital, that meant that Equatorial Palm Oil now had the right to develop large parts of the neighbourhood. But it wasn't as coercive as that might sound. They also made fairly handsome promises. For each rubber tree, a member of the community would be given $97, and then that rubber tree could be bulldozed, and they could establish a palm oil plantation, which sounded to many like a very good deal. There was no paper signed, there was no memorandum of understanding. They would also have employment, the roads would be sorted out, there would be a clinic, there would be a school, there would be opportunities for their kids. And so people understandably thought that that was a good route to economic development, and there are very few other routes available to them. In the years since that decision was made, the $97 that had been promised became $6. There was no school, no clinic, and the state of the roads is still completely parlous. And so people were extremely angry and looking for ways that they can now access justice. It's obviously extremely difficult. We have various cases that have been brought in front of the UK courts over the previous years of communities trying to hold British companies accountable for their actions overseas, and it's extremely difficult. That is through design. Companies establish complex legal structures that mean it's very difficult to hold headquarters accountable for the actions of children companies overseas. And the lack of paperwork is obviously, again, a completely deliberate ploy to ensure that it's very difficult to hold people accountable for their lives. What we are calling for is for the UK government to establish a duty on British companies overseas to respect the environment and to respect human rights, and that will be built on the principle of a failure to prevent. If you can be shown that human rights have been abused in your operations or in your supply chains, and you could have taken steps to prevent that, but you failed to do so, then you will be accountable in UK courts. And it's extremely important that that is something that happens in the UK courts, because as has been discussed by previous panellists, if a case were to be brought in Liberia against equatorial palm oil, firstly the resources available to the Liberian justice system may not allow for that case to be properly brought, but also the various issues of complicity of the Liberian government with this whole situation would also make it very difficult for communities to access justice. We do not have a huge amount of optimism that this law that we're calling for will come out in the next few years, certainly until a change of government. There is, however, I think, a maturing discussion about the role of business regulation to ensure that businesses respect human rights. We had a Modern Slavery Act in 2015 that requires British companies to be more transparent about where they pose threats to human rights and may have risks of modern slavery in their supply chains. And we have other European countries that are starting to do similar things. French has a Devoir de Vigilance Act since 2017, which has required large French companies to respect human rights in their operations, and a Ugandan community is bringing a claim against Total, the oil company, for their failure to respect land rights in Uganda. So across Europe, we're starting to see a bit of momentum behind these kinds of things, and we will be, as Tradecraft Exchange, launching a campaign the week after next to coincide with the UK Africa Investment Summit, calling on the British government to follow suit with a law establishing a duty on British companies to respect human rights in their overseas operations. But I'd be very happy to speak about that in more depth if people have specific questions. But yeah, I'll hand back over to Nikita.
Thank you all so much. I'm just going to reset it at 10 o'clock. Okay. We don't have a huge amount of time, but we'll make it work. It's very clear that there's, a lot of the colonial crimes have not been dealt with. We are seeing them repeated in the examples that Tom described. It's really shocking to hear about the palm oil companies. It does sound like it could have been something that was happening in the Kericho land grabs, back during the colonial period. So clearly, bringing up the topic of reparations is absolutely necessary, because it's clear that whatever we're doing right now is not working. I wanted to just very quickly bring up one point that you made, Professor Githiorio, which is about what role do the current governments of former colonised countries have to play in all of this. I think you just touched on it briefly, and perhaps we can think about that. And then the other question I wanted to ask is, if for example, the British government or even multinational corporations are not willing to come to the table to even have the discussions about reparations, how can we push forward in order to achieve the justice that is required for these? I think the point that you made that, you know, £2,600 might not sound like so much, but for the first time in someone's life they were able to build a house. It is so important that these issues are dealt with and brought forward, and I'm just wondering, you know, do we have other ideas for how we can ensure that that justice is achieved for these people who have, you know, in many cases been abandoned? So for all the panel, I'll start with you, Professor Kithiara.
Yeah, I said the role. Okay, as we sit here, we are fighting on two fronts. We're fighting here in London, but we also have a struggle back home to convince our own leadership that it is necessary for them to support us. I'm very pleased to have the governor here, but he's an elected person, and therefore has the ability and the place to talk for his own people. Now, the policymakers is another whole story, and without their support, it will become very, very difficult. I think Tom has also, briefly touched upon some of the difficulties you get in Liberia, the complicity of, certain local agencies maybe not actually. In short, we are living in a colonial time, neo-colonial times. The colonial linkages are still very, very strong, and I think that explains everything, because as you're trying to get rid of the tea, to get compensation from the tea farms, they are linked to the local government, they are linked to the past, they are linked to the present, and so forth. So it's quite something to entangle, and I think this should be seen as a discussion, as a process, rather than one final end, because after Kericho, we have another, we have others.
Thank you very much, Professor and Nikita. As Professor Sabli said, that this is something for discussion. This is something that we do not have ready solution. This is something that needs a serious meeting of the minds, comparing notes and trying to chart the way forward. And I think for the Mamao case, much as you need support from Kenya, you also have one advantage. Can you consider going to the European Court of Human Rights? And the Mamaos were subject of the Crown of England from 1950s all the way up to when we got independence. There's the Independence Act of 1963, where the British said, or the House of Commons stated, that they would no longer be responsible, or UK would no longer be responsible over a territory called Kenya. I think you could, I've not sat down really to think about it. You could go to the European Court of Human Rights and say, much as these people have Brexit, but they can't Brexit when it comes to issues of human rights, you have exhausted local remedies, or the local remedies in UK were not available. Can now the European Court of Human Rights consider looking at this case on its own merit? Because matters of human rights, you cannot use the issue of limitation. Yet the same people who are claiming that there's limitation are enjoying the fruits of what they did several decades ago. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. For us in Kericho, we are very grateful to the new constitution, which has created two levels of government. The county governments, which are 47 in number, and one national government called the Republic of Kenya. The challenge facing most victims all over Africa is legal fee. In our case, it is the county government of Kericho which is paying for the legal fees. And we've done it through cooperation with the national government. Before we took the action, we wrote to the Office of the Attorney General, which supports our quest to make sure that there is justice for the victims. So this is something that is a privilege for us, and I want to thank the national government for realizing that yes, these people have a genuine concern and genuine complaint, for which we need to sit with the British government and say yes, there were violations. Can we discuss how these people can be remedied? The issues that are being raised, and these are of interest to the victims, are mainly two. Apology from the UK government. And number two, compensation or reparation, so that these people can have their problems ameliorated to some degree. Fortunately also for us, the new constitution entrenched National Land Commission to address national land injustices since the time of since colonial era. And we have 10 recommendations which we would like to put before the British government, and we can discuss around this, and the victims can feel better. Number one, and you will agree with me that they are very fair recommendations. Number one, apology. I think that's not a very difficult thing to do. Number two, NLC said it was a mistake for Kericho to continue being crown land after 1963. So it is as if the rest of Kenya became independent and Kericho continued being under the crown. It makes no sense. And therefore, we are saying, even the title deeds of the multinationals read Colony and Protectorate of Kenya. You can imagine if Unilever is to sell their business as a going concern, they don't have a title deed reading Kericho County or Republic of Kenya. And this needs to be regularized as well. The other very important recommendation is, since these people have suffered from 1902, can there be compensation, some monthly profits for loss of livelihoods? Then the rest will go to the multinational companies on the ground. For example, they've never been involved in any single CSR since they came. They are now close to 120 years. They've not built a single hospital. They've not built a single school. Yet if you look at the price of tea in London here, it is 20 pounds per kilo. And there is the issue of transfer pricing. They underquote the prices in Mombasa auction. Then when they come here, they rip you off. The price of 1 kilo of tea in Mombasa is less than $3. So they're exploiting you as well. You are buying tea not at market rate. Look, a farmer in Kericho sells at the auction to Lipton for a song. And there's a lot of tea in the auction, but I'm very sure you're told tea is always scarce. That's why you have to pay so much for Earl Grey. So we want an amicable solution in this. We don't want to use unconstitutional methods to make the British government understand that we need a redress of this matter. Thank you.
A couple of thoughts just to add on alternative ways of helping communities achieve justice. One obvious area is public education of consumers and citizens, and obviously I applaud the work that the Museum of British Colonialism is doing here. I read that 59% of the British public feels like the British Empire is something to be proud of, and that's in 2016, so it's clear that a large bit of work remains to be done. And then in terms of other ways of placing pressure on businesses today, investors, mainly based in London, are financing a lot of the land grabs that we're interested in and that we've talked about. And many people in this room will have pension funds which are part of that bigger picture. So write to your pension fund, ask what their position is when it comes to land grabs. And then also thinking about what can be done in laws in other countries. There's something called free, prior and informed consent, which is something that exists in the UN Convention on the Rights of Indigenous People, as well as other international legal instruments, and it's the enshrining of the idea that if you're involved in a land transaction, you need to ensure that you get the consent of the people who live on that land and who own that land and who work that land, and that needs to be done in a way that's transparent, that gives people exactly the right information, and that allows them to withdraw their consent at any time. And those kinds of laws are starting to come in various countries that will give a much stronger legal basis in those countries for communities to bring cases. So it's quite specific, but I think worth bringing up nonetheless.
Absolutely, thank you. I have a lot of other questions, but I'm concerned about getting the rest of the audience involved. So as we've done with other panels, but I'm going to do it at a much reduced level this time. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to talk amongst yourselves, come up with any ideas, anything that you'd like to ask the panel, and then you can ask them. There's a microphone. Great, thank you, 2 minutes. To talk amongst yourselves.